this tiny dot, smaller than the tip of your pen, can shut down an entire country. It can cripple economies, can send children out of school, can cause global panic, and even bring world leaders to their knees. From COVID to cholera, from bacteria in your yogurt to microbes, mining metals, rocks, microbiology is the invisible hand behind it all. But how did it all begin? And just how vast is this field of microbiology? Get ready. You're about to enter a universe smaller than your eye, and my eye can see, but larger than you ever imagined. Let's zoom out. Before we dive into definitions, let's grasp the big picture. Microbiology is the study of microorganisms, okay? Tiny creatures you cannot see without a microscope, but they're everywhere. From deep oceans to, hospital ICUs. They affect everything. They affect our health and diseases. They affect scientific discoveries. They affect food production and productivity. They affect even the spoilage of food. They affect drug production. They affect industry and innovation. Even wars and bioterrorism are influenced by microbiology and microorganisms. Now, globally, microbiology is central to solving pandemics, creating vaccines, fighting drug resistance, and saving millions of lives. It influences economics from food security and productivity and farmer enterprise. Now, in a changing climate, microbes even regulate carbon dioxide and methane. So whether you're a student, you're a professional, or just a curious mind, microbiology touches your life more than you realize it. Microbiology is also the foundation of life, foundation of health, foundation of disease, visible only to the prepared mind. So, microbiology. Micro means small. Bio means stands for life. So this is life. And logy is study. Logy is study. Hence, microbiology is the study of small life. Or in other words, microbiology is the macroscopic study of life, or the study of macroscopic life. Microbiology is the study of macroscopic life. Now, the academic definition, for people that want to write exams, what you see in MCQs, and for instance, when you go for interviews, is microbiology is the branch of biology that studies living organisms, too small to be seen with the naked eye, such as bacteria, viruses, fungi, protozoa, and some algae, focusing on their structure, function, classification, metabolism, genetics, ecology, and role in health and diseases. That's the academic definition for microbiology. That's what you see appearing in MCQs, exam theory, and like I said, interviews. Here's a short mnemonic to remember the key components. I like to use SCARF-GEM. SCARF-GEM, in the sense that the S stands for structure, the C stands for classification, the R after the A stands for replication, the F stands for function, the G for genetics, and the E for ecology, and M for metabolism. So every microbe you see, that's every microbe is synonymous to microorganism. Every microbe you see will be studied somehow through these lenses. Now here's a false alert that people should take note of. Microbiology is not just the study of only bacteria. Because some people believe that microbiology is equal to just the study of bacteria, but that's wrong. It includes viruses, although in some sense, viruses aren't living things like classically, because we'll get into that in subsequent discussion. So, but microbiology encompasses not just bacteria only, but bacteria, viruses, fungi, protozoa, all the small organisms that we can see, and more. Even prions. Prions are actually infectious proteins, and they'll be discussed subsequently in the lectures we'll be having. So I'll go deeper into these categories in an upcoming video, where I will discuss the general organization and classification of microorganisms. And so more on that later. But this is what microbiology is about, the study of microscopic life, in simple terms. We now know what microbiology is and why it is important. But where did this journey begin? How did humans discover this invisible world? From ancient Egypt to the invention of the microscope, from plague marks, to our petri dishes, from superstitions to Nobel Prizes. We need to truly appreciate what microbiology is today. We must first understand the long, winding journey of how it was discovered. It's a story of myths, a story of marks, and microscopes, and mind-blowing discoveries and breakthroughs. And so to do that, we'll look at the historical perspective from the prehistoric man down to the ancient Egyptians, to the time of the Greeks, and the time of the Romans. Then we'll look at it from the time of the Romans to the Dark Ages, then to the Renaissance. And from there, we'll talk about what happened in the 19th century, what happened in the 20th century, and even down to this point we are in the 21st century. And that's how we would eventually have a full grasp of the beauty of microbiology. So, looking at the prehistoric man. Now, the prehistoric man now, say this caveman, sort of. Has a big ball of meat, bone, and this is tied on a stick. Stick. Don't mind my drawing too much. So we have this, and this fire emanating from. Imagine a time before science when man saw food rot, and people fell ill, and wounds just festered, they delayed. But you had no idea. There were no microscopes, just observations and superstitions. And every human being noticed this. They noticed that meat spoils faster when it's heat. And they noticed that fermented drinks give energy. And wounds could get infected. But they had no clue whether microbes were involved or not. And instead, they blame evil spirits. They say evil spirits did all those things. Or they said they had the wrath of God. The gods were not happy with them. And prehistoric man was actually curious. So, as at this point, there was observation of the activities of microorganisms, even though they could not be fully explained. So, the Egyptians, they used fermentation to make beers and bread. Egyptian scrolls have history, or they document the use of moldy bread in wound treatment. And microbiology-wise, it has been thought of that those moldy bread might have contained penicillium about 2,000 years long before Alexander Fleming discovered penicillin. And so the ancient Egyptians had a lot of roles they performed in ancient natural antibiotics and antimicrobials. Then came in the Greeks. The Greeks, which came in around 1000 to 400 BC. We have the likes of Aristotle and Hippocrates and Democritus. For instance, Aristotle himself believed that disease had natural cause, not supernatural causes as was assumed prior to his coming, but that disease had natural causes. And Democritus, for instance, believed that everything is made of tiny particles. It was the early atomic theory, sort of. And Aristotle believed in spontaneous generation, that life can arise from non-living matter, like maggots. How maggots arise from meat. But that was later debunked anyway. But the Greeks eventually started thinking, started using their mind. The misconception of spontaneous generation actually dominated for centuries, like for lots of years before it was eventually debunked. Then came in the Romans. The Romans coming in around 400 BC to around 500 AD. And the Romans, they advanced public health and aqueducts. They had latrines and they had sewage system, and they believed in miasma. Miasma being bad air. They say bad air caused diseases. It was wrong, but it led to sanitation improvements. And you see, good doctors actually think practically like the Romans do. Even if the theory was flawed, they ended up improving outcomes by improving hygiene. And infection control has roots in Roman engineering. So these were, the various parts of how microbiology evolved over the course of time, from prehistoric man to the ancient Egyptians to the Greeks, the Aristotles and the Hippocrates, down to the Romans. And it progressed from the Romans up to the Middle Ages. The Middle Ages, from around 500 to 1500 AD, was also known as the Dark Ages. And it lived up to its name, in the sense that science told and religion dominated. So diseases ran wide. There was Black Death, known as the bubonic plague, and it killed up to 2 million people, 200 million people in Europe. And plague doctors, they wore scary, dead big marks. It was filled with herbs that they wore to block miasma. And monasteries tried to preserve Greeks and the Greek and the Roman medical text. See, the plague marks actually then became a symbol that is now used in modern culture, modern pop culture, and in fashion. However, there was still no understanding of microbes in the Dark Ages. Then came the Renaissance. And the Renaissance took off from 1500s, that's 1500 AD, up to the 18th century, thereabout. And in the Renaissance period, curiosity returned. So science awoke. And we had the likes of Francesco Redi and the likes of Anton van Leeuwenhoek. These people actually did a lot of work in that period. And so, like for instance, Francesco Redi eventually proved that maggots don't just appear in meat, but that life comes from life. And so he was able to discard and disprove the spontaneous generation theory that had been held for centuries. And the likes of Anton van Leeuwenhoek, who happened to have lived around 1670s thereabout, he made a powerful single lens microscope. And he was the first person to see and describe what he called the animalculus, which comprised of the bacteria and the protozoa and the sperm cells. And so there was a bat of global knowledge at this moment. And because people could finally see microbes, they could finally see the invisible for the first time. So microbiology was born, following the invention of the microscope by Anton van Leeuwenhoek. Imagine being the first person to see an entirely hidden world, and that led to the activities and discoveries of the 19th century, taking place from 1800s to 1899, also referred to as the Golden Age. In the Golden Age of microbiology, everything accelerated. We had the likes of Louis Pasteur, who eventually disproved spontaneous generation completely, and he created vaccines for rabies and anthrax. Then came in Robert Koch. Robert Koch eventually proposed what we now know as the Koch postulates. And the postulate helps to prove that microbes cause disease. And the Petri dish was invented, and agar was introduced. We had first bacteria vaccines, and actually Pasteur and Koch laid foundations that eventually brought about multiple prize-winning discoveries. Then moving on to the 20th century, that is from the 1900s to the 1999s. There we eventually unlocked the DNA, and we unlocked the structure, and we eventually got to understood genetics, and we understood antibiotics, and understood viruses. And in 1928, Alexander Fleming eventually discovered penicillin, and that helped to save millions of lives during World War II. And later on, the likes of Watson and Crick eventually discovered the DNA structure. And there was a lot of things going on in the 20th century. A lot of cell culture techniques were discovered and were born. And there was the invention of the polymerase chain reaction, which eventually changed diagnosis forever. And tech and innovation exploded. There was biotech boom, economic boom, because microbiology, for instance, became a multi-billion-dollar industry with the likes of vaccines and diagnostics and pharma, and biotech. So this was the evolution of the application and the discoveries that were made in microbiology as time progressed, which now led to the discoveries in the 21st century, which we are. The microbial world is evolving, and so are we. The COVID-19 pandemic actually brought about a global awakening in microbiology. Currently, you hear of the CRISPR-Cas9 gene editing that's going on, which is interesting, by the way. It's where they cut and edit the DNA, just like text. And in our own era, AI is integrated, is being used in microbial identification and in drug development. And NASA is currently studying microbes in space missions. You see, the World Health Organization and the CDC considers the antimicrobial resistance, AMR, as a top threat. Nevertheless, there are actually huge opportunities in microbiology, like synthetic biology and biotech and microbial tech startups and biopharma and AI microbial integration. So there are a lot of huge opportunities currently in microbiology. Now we commemorate the World Microbiome Day on the 27th of June annually, and there are a lot of emerging Nobel Prizes, from the study of microbiology and microbial innovations. So from prehistoric guessing to the precision we have now, like precision in gene editing and in microbial innovations, microbiology's history, shows that we've come a long way and we've been affected by microbes. And our understanding has evolved over time with the use of tools, the use of the knowledge we've gathered, the use of science, with the knowledge we've gathered from science, and with time. And the journey is still far actually. The next discoveries, in microbiology might just come from you, or from your office, or from your lab, or from your thoughts. Microbiology isn't just one thing. It is a world of many dimensions. From the one that kill, the one that heal, to those that powers industries and build economies. And microbiology comprises of a lot of things, including bacteriology, which is the study of bacteria. And when you hear bacteriology, think of tuberculosis, think of the anthrax, think of the cholera, typhoid, Escherichia coli, And basically, I like to use a mnemonic for bacteriology. So the beast. And the B stands for the bacillus, rod-like bacteria. The E for Escherichia, the A for actinomyces, the S for salmonella, and the T for treponema. And this is important because it has pharmacological correlates. It says that antibiotics like penicillin and cephalosporins were discovered from the study of bacteria. And all these are important in the understanding of culture and sensitivity, which is done in labs. So you need to, and by the way, you need to know gram-positive and gram-negative bacteria. In addition to that, microbiology encompasses study of viruses, known as virology. And in virology, it spans from the study of things like HIV, that's the human immunodeficiency virus, to COVID-19, to influenza, to Ebola, Zika virus. Virus is basically that rule headlines. And a mnemonic would be the HAPIS, HAPIS-CV. We talk of H standing for HIV, Ebola, rabies virus, the papilloma virus, the Epstein-Barr virus, the SARS virus, the coronavirus, which is also the SARS-CoV-2, and the varicella-zoster virus. Next is mycology. Mycology being the study of fungi. And fungi cause diseases, but they also give us bread and beer and penicillin. So when you hear of fungi, think of mycology. And things like Candida, Aspergillus, Nocardia, Sporotrix, and Penicillium should come to mind. And this is important for lab tech because they are important in potassium hydroxide preparation and also in fungal culture. And a pharmacological correlate to mycology is the study of antifungals and antifungals like fluconazole and amphotericin. Now, globally, fungal infection, especially in immunocompromised, is becoming a challenge. It's becoming a challenge and it's rising. By immunocompromised, I mean those people with HIV, transplant patients, and patients with cancer. So it's a very big challenge right now. So another integral part of microbiology is parasitology. Parasitology, as the name implies, is the study of parasites. Parasites being things like protozoa. So you think of things like malaria, think of things like schistosoma, things like tapeworm, they are mostly common in Asia and in Africa. And, think of things like amoeba, schistosoma, microfilaria, and they're important for tropical medicine and travel medicine because they are responsible for high morbidity in places like Africa and in Asia. And pharmacologically, anti-malarials, for instance, and antihelminths derived from the study of parasites, parasitology, and followed by immunology, which is immunology. This is immunology, being the study of the immune system, the body's defense system. And that is responsible for how your body detects, remembers, and attacks microbes. And when you think of immunology, or when you hear immunology, you should think of AIM. AIM being antigens. Think of antigens, you think of immunoglobulins, and you think of memory cells. So these are important. The study of immunology is important in how vaccines are derived. And it also plays a role in allergies, autoimmune diseases. All of them, they all fall here. Likewise, the study of what we call the monoclonal antibodies, like what they call rituximab, they all fall here. So this is an integral part of microbiology. And you need to take note of what we call adaptive and innate immunology, sort of the adaptive and innate immunity. You see, the immune system is nature's best doctor. A strong immune system is nature's best doctor. And so immunology is important. Diagnostic microbiology, the diagnostics, is how we identify and track infections in the lab. So in this, you think of things like gram staining, think of gram culture and sensitivity. Think of things like polymerase chain reaction, ELISA, a rapid test like is done in HIV and malaria. You think of, by the way, always collect specimen before giving antibiotics. And the diagnostic industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry. It's a multi-billion-dollar sector. Yeah. And the next is the antimicrobial resistance, which is where drugs try to enter. And there's a shield in here. See? So microorganisms are actually evolving. They're evolving very fast. And it is important to note that as they're evolving, they fight and try to prevent drugs from working. And so in antimicrobial resistance, we are worried or concerned with things like drug inactivation, reduced permeability. We are worried about the increased efflux of drugs and the protein target modification that happens as a result of the evolution of microorganisms. And so you need to beware, because antimicrobial resistance causes over 1.2 million deaths annually in the whole world. That's worldwide. And so it's very important, something to take note of. The World Health Organization ranks antimicrobial resistance as one of the top 10 public health threats. Although there are future opportunities in that area, actually, because we're developing next generation of antimicrobials. So because of the evolution of the microorganisms, it's important to develop another generation of drugs that can actually counter this phenomenon. So something to look into. Now, antibiotic stewardship should be legally enforced in many hospitals. That's something to take note of to avoid medical legal issues. And tracking is important because it helps us to get who is sick and know how to prevent or stop that spread. And that now leads to the last part of microbiology, where we talk of, we have the agent, and that leads to the host, and there's let me bring it here, there's the infection. So we need to track the path microorganisms move leading to infection. And that's where epidemiology comes into. Epidemiology and infection control is also an integral part of microbiology. And in epidemiology, we think of host, think of the agent, think of the transmission, we think of the prevention, we think of the intervention and the environment. And nosocomial infections, especially in hospitals, it's a real threat. It's a real threat. It's a real threat. That's why hand washing and hand hygiene is important, especially in nursing. To wash your hands and keep yourself clean, basically to prevent spread, especially in the healthcare facilities. And it is also important to know that outbreaks must be recorded. It's a medical legal issue. It's a very important medical legal issue. And you see here of the World Health Organization and the CDC trying to track outbreaks through the use of epidemiology. So microbiology is everywhere. Microbiology is everywhere. It's important in understanding how we fall sick, important in understanding how we heal, important in understanding industries and how it builds them, and even economies, because it affects the economy. We've come a long way from ancient guesses to microscopes to modern labs. But what's happening now? What are the jaw-dropping innovations going on in microbiology today? Top of it, or one of it, rather, is what I mentioned earlier, the CRISPR in gene editing. CRISPR isn't just burst, it's actually writing biology. Because scientists use CRISPR as it's a microbial immune system that is used to edit genes in viruses, in bacteria, and even in human cells. And this is applied in treating genetic diseases, it's applied in creating disease-resistant drugs, disease-resistant crops, and it's also applied in developing phage therapy to kill superbugs. Now, in 2020, a Nobel Prize was won by Jennifer Doudna and I think Manuela Carpentier, I think that's her name, Carpentier. I can't really pronounce her name very well. I think Carpentier, yeah. With respect to that, and it's very important. It's very important to have a look into that field. Now, secondly, another thing that is going on in our time is AI. Of course, everybody knows artificial intelligence. But AI is being integrated into microbiology and is used to study microbial patterns, and recognition. So AI can actually predict outbreaks and can identify bacteria faster than humans, and even design new antibiotics. So this is used, for example, during COVID-19, AI was used to help track global case curves and the mutations of the virus. And it is applied in machine learning, in lab techs, for accurate diagnosis, for many other things. So AI is another thing that is being integrated in microbiology in our time. Now, future jobs may actually involve AI-integrated microbiology, diagnostics with smart microscopes and real-time pathogen tracking. So that's interesting. It's very interesting. And the next thing that is actually going on in our time is what is known as the phage therapy revival. So yes, phage therapy revival is another key thing that's playing in our time. Remember that viruses attack bacteria. They call them the bacteriophages. And they are tiny killers of resistant bacteria or superbugs. And is there a chance that this can be used where antibiotics fail? Like in multi-drug resistance tuberculosis, for instance, where antibiotics are not very, very effective. So this can be actually applied. And they also apply this in what they call the compassionate phage, which is adapted, already in use in the USA and in Georgia and in France. And it's a global attention that's gathering to this, especially in Africa and Asia, where the antimicrobial resistance is rising. Now, do you know that microbes grow differently in space? Because of that, NASA or space microbiology is becoming a wide field in our time. NASA and the ESA are studying microbial behavior and bacterial behavior, particularly in space. And it's been noticed that some of them tend to be more aggressive and tend to grow or mutate faster. And can we send microbes to Mars, like to build future food systems in Mars, something like that? I mean, Bacillus and Enterococcus were sent to the International Space Station, so but it's a thought. It's a thought. In addition to the space microbiology, synthetic biology is also something that is ongoing, and what we call the designer microbes. And what if you can create a microbe, like out of nothing, just create a microbe from the start, from the scratch, and that would be mind blowing, because that means we'll be able to apply that knowledge, the knowledge of synthetic biology, in creating microbes that eat plastic. And you can also have engineered bacteria that produce things like insulin and biofuels. And so the future, it's a future idea anyway. I think it's a future idea, to build custom microbes that can clean the environment, can clean plastic and can clean pollution, and make vaccines on demand, basically. There's a legal issue around it here, because who owns the designer life? Who has the capacity to design and create those things? So there are patent wars ongoing on that currently. In addition to that, we have the global surveillance and One Health, where humans, animals, environment are looked at in a One Health link. And microbiology is the link. The World Health Organization, the WHO, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, and the World Organization for Animal Health, the WOA, form a tripartite alliance, and they try to look into these issues, the human, the animal, and the environmental, co-activities, are responsible for maintenance of health. And so this knowledge of microbiology is also important in monitoring zoonotic diseases like the COVID-19 and the monkeypox and the bird flu. And even in tech, we have the metagenomics and the wastewater testing, as well as real data maps. In addition to the global surveillance and the One Health, another thing that is happening currently is known as the microbiome exploration. And do you know your body is more than 90% microbes? Like, it is more than 90% microbial by cell count, in terms of when you count the cells in your body. More than 90% of it is microbial. And science is just beginning to understand this, actually. And we are now beginning to see that the gut, skin, and oral and vaginal microbiomes are now linked to things like obesity, things like depression, things like autoimmune diseases, and things like drug metabolism in the body. And in laboratories, something called the 16S ribosomal RNA, now the 16S rRNA sequencing is ongoing. And of course, concurrently with the microbiome transplantation that is ongoing. And this is applied, or is going to be applicable in personalized medicine. And in psychobiotics, in the sense that we look at the brain-gut axis, kind of. So that's where the knowledge of microbiology is going, and the exploration, the massive innovative researches and activities that are currently going on in our own time. In addition to this, some other things that are being studied, sort of, are malaria vaccine, and the breakthrough through the RTS, the S/the AS0101 vaccine in Africa, and there's the universal flu vaccine, which is currently in trials. We have the microbial fuel cells, and the bacteria generating electricity. That's something that is actually ongoing. Likewise, in HIV care, they are trying to see how gene editing can be employed in HIV care. And in addition to all this, there's something called the biological computers, where DNA logic gates are beginning to use the bacteria for that. And so biology, microbiology rather, is the future. So the next time somebody says, say germs are gross, tell them that germs are also genius, because germs are also helping us to make massive breakthroughs in health and various endeavors of our human lives. So we've journeyed from ancient ideas to the frontiers of space, but let's bring everything together. So we talked about microbiology and looked at the microbe being MICROBE, and we looked at man's curiosity, the early curiosity of man, and that encompassed, where we looked at the overview and the ancient history. Then we came to how the invisible life became visible through the invention of the microscopes. And we talked about the centuries milestone. We talked about the historical timelines from, early days of man to the prehistoric time to the 21st century, which we are in now. Then we looked at the range of fields in microbiology and mentioned things like bacteriology and virology and parasitology and immunology. And then we also talked about the outbreaks and the opportunities. We mentioned a bit of epidemics and the pandemics in microbiology, as well as some entrepreneurship that are currently ongoing in microbiology. Then we looked at breakthroughs like the CRISPR gene and the CRISPR gene editing and the microbiome, as well as we looked at the microbiome phages, and we also looked at synthetic biology. In addition to this, we saw that microbiology is everywhere and is essential. It has global impact in food, in medicine, in space, and in health. And so microbiology is actually the foundation of all biomedical sciences, from diagnosis to treatment to public health. It's everything. And so from pandemics to, like probiotics, from germs to gene editing, from, A to B, you must understand microbes to master medicine. And every discovery in microbiology opens doors to entrepreneurship and innovation. And even Nobel Prizes for as many as interested in that. And so that's what we've looked at in this discussion. So how does this apply to you? As a doctor, this is important because you need it for diagnosing infections and choosing treatments. As a pharmacist, you need it for understanding drug and understanding how drug and microorganisms, how they interact. and their dynamics. I also need it for understanding what we mentioned earlier, the antimicrobial resistance. Now, as a lab scientist, you need this to understand culture and sensitivity and the polymerase chain reaction and the ELISA. As even a nurse, you need this to understand infection control and universal precautions and basically safety and sanitation, especially in the hospital. As a researcher, you also need to understand that the future is being built with things like phages and CRISPR and microbiomes, and so you need to dive into that. Even as an entrepreneur or as a biotech individual or startup, you need to understand that this is being used in the diagnostics and in vaccine platforms. It also has some role in legal and policy endeavors, in the sense that people are actually patenting genes right now, and there's a pandemic. There are pandemic laws, and things like data protection and many other things that are legally inclined in this study of microbiology. And if you're just just general public, generally like me myself, everybody, it's important to understand microbiology, because microbiology is employed in the production of vaccines and in food safety and in hygiene, hygiene practices. So it's important to actually understand microbiology. You see, the World Health Organization, the Center for Disease Control, and even the CDC and AFNet, and ministries of health globally, they depend on microbiology. In Africa, like tuberculosis, for instance, malaria, cholera, Lassa, these are all microbiology-driven issues. And public health will win if microbiology wins. Now, every epidemic you hear or you've seen is microbiology in action, actually. Microbiology in action. Once you see an epidemic in the news, just know that microbiology is being involved. But there are some questions, Can bacteria actually survive in boiling acid? Yes, in case you are wondering. Can viruses be used as medicine? Yes, can be used as medicine. And do you have more, that's me and you, do we have more microbial DNA than we have human DNA? Yes. And did the ancient humans know about microbes? Let's say yes, sort of, in a way, kind of. So it's amazing. Microbiology is amazing. It's amazing. Fact. There are many microbes in your gut, and there are stars in the galaxy, and they help control your mood, your weight, and even brain function. That's the microbiome. You're not alone, you're an ecosystem. So, now that you've seen the history, the scope, the miracles of microbiology, have you ever wondered, what exactly are microorganisms? How do we classify bacteria, viruses, fungi, and parasites? Why are they harmful? And which of them are harmful? Which are helpful? And which are both? Because some can be both. So in our next lecture, we'll look at this and we'll break it down, make it crystal clear by understanding the general overview and classification of microorganisms. So be sure to like, subscribe, and make sure to hit the bell icon so that you don't miss out on it. I'm Dr. Joshua Odo, and this was a medical microbiology lecture. Thank you for watching. Share this with your family and friends, and drop your thoughts in the comment section, and stay curious, because even the tiniest things in life make the biggest difference sometimes.